Hey, everyone. Welcome to Locked On Lakers for Thursday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. Robert Sarver has been punished by the NBA. LeBron James has weighed in, and it raises the question, what exactly do people want from their owners? That's next on Locked On Lakers.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. Andy, it's always free. It's never going to be behind a paywall, and it is always going to be of damn high quality.
Yes, it is.
Locked On Lakers on YouTube. Have we got to 8,000 yet? We're real close. We're pushing 8K.
Yep.
In the subscriber count. Help us get over that 8,000 count. Really appreciate all the support everybody's shown that channel. Great community of people there that have popped up, and you can participate in that. Leave us questions there. It's a great way to become part of the show. We go there every day. We look for comments and questions that we can use on the next podcast. Particularly now, it's a great time to become involved with it. You can also tweet us at Cam Brothers. The big news over the last day or so has been Robert Sarver and the NBA's punishment of Robert Sarver, 1 year, owner of the Phoenix Suns, 1 year suspension and a $10 million fine. The 1 year, as Adam Silver pointed out in his press conference on Wednesday, was not the maximum punishment. The 10 million was. So he had more leeway on the amount of years or the length of the suspension. But he did fine him the maximum amount of money for a guy as rich as Robert Sarver. I'm not sure how much 10 million is.
This also, too, for people unaware, this is the result of an investigation that came after allegations of really bad behavior from Robert Sarver in terms of racist language, using the N-word at least 5 times when recounting statements of other people, inequitable conduct towards female employees, sex-related comments,
amounts of misogyny throughout the organization
and
over a long period of time.
And it should also be noted, too, for people who are unaware, Sarver doesn't just own the Phoenix Suns; he owns the Phoenix Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
So, not that this wouldn't be a problem if he didn't own a WNBA team, but the fact that he does complicates this even more.
It just makes it certainly, it's a separate league and separate structures, but it certainly is.
It adds layers,
to say the least. There are a lot of people, and we'll get to LeBron James weighed in on this. He commented on it. We'll get to that in a second. The general consensus, Andy, is that the league let him off easy, him being Sarver. A lot of comparisons to Donald Sterling, who, of course, after the tape with V. Stiviano and the talk about Magic Johnson and the just abhorrent language that was used there, and on top of years and years and years of bad behavior, both as an NBA owner and as a human, essentially had his team stripped from him, a lifetime ban. They didn't strip the team; they just banned him for life, and he eventually would sell the team. So the general consensus seemed to be, I think, that Sarver got off easy. What was your reaction when you saw the punishment?
Well, I mean, first of all, that consensus didn't lessen after Adam Silver met with the media in Chicago. The Board of Governor meetings are going on there, and Silver took a lot of questions about this situation with Adam Sarver and the punishment and, his ultimate decisions with this. And we'll get into some of the things that Adam Silver said that, for the first time, as I tweeted out at Cam Brothers, today was the day that Adam Silver finally became Roger Goodell.
Yeah.
Because he really, this was the first time that this commissioner, who's been very lauded for being a very innovative, very progressive, very, I think, thoughtful, introspective commissioner, really seemed for the first time out there serving as a meat shield for these billionaire owners who, lest we forget, he works for them, not the other way around.
That was my reaction when I saw this press conference was, get out there and take a bullet for us, Adam. And look, because I think obviously you can't find him more than 10 million. And the suspension thing to me is interesting because, I mean, a year when you own the team, to be suspended for a year is a long time to be away from this thing that you own. You could have done 2 years, sure. I guess 3. I mean, but at some point, if you're going to suspend a guy for 4 seasons, for something, you're wondering why you're just letting him back in at all to the degree that you can. And Silver tried to, again, the obvious comparisons to Donald Sterling, and I think Silver was correct in pointing out that they are not entirely parallel situations. A lot of the stuff that was being investigated with Sarver was older. It had happened before. Many of the people were no longer with the organization. They have supposedly undergone, made efforts to try and fix the behavior. They've, supposedly cleaned up their act to some degree. I actually think the better parallel in a lot of ways is Mark Cuban and some of the things that were discovered in Dallas in terms of that type of misogyny and inappropriate behavior towards female employees, particularly, and abusive behavior and all of that. It's sort of somewhere, it's the situations kind of put themselves somewhere in between there for me.
Well, it's going to be interesting as we talk about what's more to come, because there definitely is going to be more to come, particularly because players have started weighing in. LeBron James tweeting out, read through the Sarver stories a few times now. I got to be honest, our league definitely got this wrong. I don't need to explain why. You all read the stories, decide for yourself. I said it before, and I'm going to say it again. There's no place in this league for this kind of behavior. I love this league and deeply respect our leadership, but this isn't right. There's no place for sexism, misogyny, and racism in any workplace. Doesn't matter if you own the team or play for the team. We hold our league up as an example of our values, and this ain't it. What stood out to me, Brian, beyond just LeBron being very direct in how he felt about it, there is no place in this league for that type of behavior. Very similar to what he said about Donald Sterling. Yeah. And LeBron's comments then were credited for getting a lot of player movement going in 2014 when Donald Sterling was eventually stripped of his team. Chris Paul, who is obviously on the Phoenix Suns, then tweeted out, like many others, I reviewed the report. I was and am horrified and disappointed by what I read. This conduct, especially towards women, is unacceptable, must never be repeated. I am of the view that the sanctions fell short in truly addressing what we can all agree was atrocious behavior. My heart goes out to all the people that were affected. This raises the question, obviously, of what comes next. And a lot of this will be dictated by, frankly, the reaction from players, the reaction from media, the reaction from sponsors, because how far this goes ultimately will be dictated by how untenable it is for Robert Sarver to continue owning this team.
And that's important because, again, we talk about Donald Sterling being, he was suspended by the league forever. Like, he was banned, but they didn't
banished.
Unless I'm missing it, he still had to sell the team.
Yes.
And so they couldn't, and what Adam Silver said, and I think when you talk about like what comes next, and kind of taking a bullet for the team and everybody for the team, in this case being, the owners, the rest of them, what I think what they're counting on even is the sort of inertia that you're talking about, where the pressure on Sarver, I'm not sure it'll work, but the pressure on Sarver is such that he ends up needing to sell the team, because Sterling was in a position where nobody would play for him. The Clippers were literally ready to walk off the floor.
Yeah, for people who forgot, the timing of this happened with Donald Sterling. The Clippers were in the playoffs.
Yes.
They were in a series against the Warriors, and both teams were seriously contemplating not playing that game. So like everything, timing and context and specific matter. When we come back though, Brian, there's one thing. I mean, there was a lot that Adam Silver said in this. that I think raised eyebrows or, sparked a lot of, well, yeah, but what about blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
But there was one thing in particular that Adam Silver said that really you could feel the proverbial dog crap that he was stepping into as he said this, that I think is really important when you consider the question of just how much further this will actually go.
So we'll do that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online is your number one source for all your pro and college sports betting needs and sports info this season. Find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts. Bet Online is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf, but also, too, Lakers Familia, Locked On Lakers Familia, NBA futures. If you want to look ahead to the 2023 season, lay some early action. The Lakers are, as of this recording, getting 20-1 odds to win the title. They are 6-point underdogs opening the season against Golden State. Maybe ring night is too distracting for the Warriors to focus. And Russell Westbrook, 150-1 odds to win his second MVP.
What a story that would be.
Yes, it would be. Boy, if the Lakers trade him and he does that, egg on their face.
Or if he stays in LA. I mean, can you imagine how well this season has gone if Russell Westbrook wins MVP? It's a storybook season for the ages.
It really is. That extension that he gets.
We should actually do a show on this, on what has happened if Russell Westbrook actually pays out on that 150-1 while with the Lakers.
It would be pretty amazing. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device. Learn more about the trends in action. Bet online where the game starts. All right. Our buddy Howard Beck was at this press conference, a longtime NBA writer currently with Sports Illustrated, and he asked Adam Silver the difference between, if any employee of a team behaved in the same way as Robert Sarver, used the same language as Robert Sarver, that person would be fired, no questions asked. And in the meantime, Robert Sarver, who is the owner and theoretically should have more accountability and more responsibility, is not, in essence, he's not losing anything. And what really creates that difference? And Adam Silver ended up saying the quiet part out loud in a couple different ways. It's a long quote, but I think it's worth hearing. There are particular rights here. Someone who owns an NBA team as opposed to somebody who's an employee, the equivalent of a $10 million fine and a 1-year suspension. I don't know how to measure that against a job, but I have certain authority by virtue of this organization, and that's what I exercise. I don't have the right to take away his team. I don't want to rest on that legal point because, of course, there could be a process that takes away a team in this league. It's very complicated, and I have to make the decision, and it didn't rise to that. But to me, the consequences are here for Mr. Sarver. Reputationally, it's even hard to make those comparisons to somebody who commits an inappropriate act in the workplace in somewhat of an anonymous fashion versus what is a huge public issue now around this person. There is no neat answer here other than the rights that come with owning an NBA team, how that is set up within our Constitution. What it would take to remove that team from his control is very involved process, and it is different than holding a job. It just is. When you actually own a team, it's just a very different proposition. A lot of people rightly interpret that as Adam Silver essentially saying, when you're a billionaire who owns the team, the rules are just different for you. And it was interpreted that way so much that Mike Bass, an NBA spokesperson, issued a statement later saying, quote, Commissioner Silver's answers to a question about the rights of business owners did not mean to suggest that NBA players, team employees, and team owners are not held to the same standard of appropriate conduct. They absolutely are, end quote.
Right.
Except, of course, Brian, when they're not.
Except when they're not. And here's the thing. It's like, he's not wrong. He's right. I mean,
this is the way the world works.
Because it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about punishment, can we punish Robert Sarver? Yes, the league can. I think they could have punished him more, a second year, a third year. But what they can't do, and what Adam Silver is essentially saying, which is the thing that I think people wanted and that people believe, Robert Sarver shouldn't own an NBA team. And, there was a long time when people thought Robert Sarver was just sort of a run-of-the-mill conventional a-hole who was
and a cheapskate on top of it.
Right. And who was a terrible owner because he was cheap. He was a bad owner because he wouldn't spend on the team, because he was sort of seen as a cranky, bleep hole, bad owner. But, this reporting comes out from Baxter Holmes at ESPN. It was last year, I believe it was, and starts an investigation.
Really did great work on that.
It was. And you start to learn more about not just that he's a bad guy, but that the organizational control here in Phoenix was woefully lacking. So on the one hand, he is being treated the same. He used offensive language. He did it, and he's being fined $10 million. It's a maximum the league can fine him. And he is being suspended from the team for a year. Most people think that could have been more, but there is a limit to some degree, I guess, short of a lifetime ban. The one thing, though, that what Adam Silver is saying, and he is correct, is that for all intents and purposes, without an incredibly protracted fight, with just absurd legal consequences and all these other things, he can't take his team away.
Well, certainly not unilaterally.
You can't just kick the guy out of the league. You can suspend him, but you can't take his team away. And it was the same thing with Donald Sterling, who was suspended, but still had to sell the team. The league really, even then, couldn't take his team away. And I forget who it was. I apologize, and I'm going to go back and try to look. The real moral of the story here is Robert Sarver's how long has he been the owner here?
I want to say since 2004 or 5.
Right. It's been a long time. It's about 20 years. And, the league was very different in 2002, 2003, 2004 than it was in 1990, 1983, the 70s, when people like Dr. Buss, family ownership, and all this other stuff were coming in. But it shows that the league needs to be very careful about who they let in the club, because once you're in the club, it's very hard to get rid of the people who are in the club. And I'm sure, I don't, reporting from Adrian Wojnarowski, for example, Robert Sarver's not particularly tight with other NBA owners. He's not terribly well respected. He's not terribly well liked. He's not terribly terribly chummy with any of these people. But he is one of the people in the club. And as Mark Cuban, who, as it turned out, I guess maybe knew something, pointed out during the Sterling thing, none of these guys want bright lights shined on everything happening inside their organization. For all of them, even the best run companies, there's going to be something there that is embarrassing, that is inappropriate, that is whatever. And, trying to figure out what the line is and all that, the behavior in this particular case, is so egregious that had they taken his team away, if they could, I wouldn't have objected. I mean, but I do think Silver is not incorrect to point out that the circumstances are slightly different, that it is not exactly an apples to apples comparison when you're talking about this versus Sterling, but where LeBron is right, where Chris Paul is right, he doesn't belong in the league. And so what I think Silver is hoping is the inertia of this eventually forces him to sell, and that kind of the politics and the player situation and all these other things will sort of squeeze Sarver out of the league and do what the league itself isn't either able or fully willing to do.
In saying the quiet part out loud, first, there is that part about the billionaires having different rules, and that just is across every single industry and every single walk of life. The other part, though, that he said quietly out loud was the tacit admission that this fight was going to be way harder, and that for the time being, the league and the owners who ultimately would tell him, we have your back, go lead us in this way, it's currently not there. And one of the big differences, obviously there was different circumstances with Donald Sterling. You had, the proverbial smoking gun, which was the audio, which had him dead to rights. And just, we've seen millions of
Magic
times
Johnson.
audio, right? Audio and video, but also too, and this is really ironic, him saying this stuff about, he wasn't just saying terrible things about black people. He was saying terrible things about black people who happen to be Magic Johnson.
Yes.
And that's going to,
it's Magic Johnson.
That's going to hit people differently. Ironically, he's the one black person who doesn't need our collective protection, but he's going to be protected when something like that happens because he's Magic Johnson and he's beloved. But also, too, the league had wanted Donald Sterling out for years.
Correct.
He had been, for decades, an embarrassment as a person, but also he had managed to lower the value of a basketball franchise in Los Angeles. And this was an opening that frankly made this pretty easy for the NBA. Like, in relative terms, removing him, it was long and protracted because Donald Sterling is stubborn and insane and lives, in his own world. But in terms of the ability to do this, combined with the fact that players were calling for it, media was calling for it, fans were calling for it, you were going to lose sponsors over this, it became a relatively easy thing for the league to do, which is why
it became easy for them to suspend him.
Right. But also
and start the process of trying to squeeze him out.
Exactly. On the list of egregious things that Donald Sterling had done to deserve losing his team, this recording might not have cracked the top 10. Yeah. In all honesty, like, it was actually,
it's worth. I mean, for people who missed it, go back and go find Ramona's podcast. The 30 for 30 that was done on this. Like,
it's going to become an FX series.
If you don't remember, Donald Sterling, the history in LA it's cartoonish.
Housing discrimination.
It's legitimately absurd. Like, you wouldn't think it would be true if you just wrote it down on a piece of paper and all this stuff. So all of that is true. And what the other thing that I got really thinking about, because we've been certainly quite critical of Lakers management over the last decade or so, and the success of the team, lack thereof. Again, 1 and 2 playoff appearances in the last 9 seasons. It's not been a good run. There have been many things that you could be embarrassed about as a fan in terms of how the team is run and all that. But all of it has been, for the most part, with some small exceptions, maybe we'll talk about in the next segment. But, it's all been conventional bad stuff, competence-based. Or do they know what they're doing? But the organization, you don't hear, there's not stories of rampant misogyny or rampant racism or inappropriate behavior from your team owner and all these other things. And, say what you want about Jim Buss, there wasn't any of that, coming from. The flip side is the team has been terrible for huge stretches. So I whenever these kinds of things come up, I always wonder what exactly it is that fans are willing to tolerate. Because for a long time, Robert Sarver was one of the worst owners in the league because he was cheap and the team wasn't good. Now the team is quite good. Well, and I want to have that conversation about just what fans want. Because say what you want about the Buss family, this ain't their problem. So we'll do that next. How much do you think, Andy, fans are willing to overlook? Like, Stan Kroenke, for example, owner of the Rams, by all rights is kind of a jerk.
He ain't popular in St. Louis.
He's definitely not popular in St. Louis, where we are from. He's just, he's not universally loved. Let's put it that way. Even in LA, where they just brought a team to Super Bowl. Now, he's not Robert Sarver in terms of, or Donald Sterling, right? He's just kind of a jerk, is my understanding. But fans don't care because he's provided a good team, and he's not given, certainly in LA, anything for fans to be embarrassed about from sort of an ethical and a moral level. You don't have to hide your head in shame. You don't have to hide your head in shame for being a Lakers fan over stuff like this, like where you have to be embarrassed on behalf of your ownership. Clippers fans back in the day had to be embarrassed on behalf of, of their ownership, because it's like, yeah, I love my team, but good God, that guy's the owner. Phoenix Suns fans are going through that right now. Do you think there are Lakers fans that would trade that kind of embarrassment for more competence in the front office, though, and a better product on the floor than we're getting over the last, 9 years? by and
Well,
large?
first, before answering the question, I just want to make this point because I think it's worth noting in talking about that level of toxicity and misogyny that to the best of either one of our knowledge, and we've been around this team for a while, does not exist within the Lakers. It is one advantage that comes from having a woman at the top of the food chain, because I think a woman is going to be more sensitive to this as something to be looking for and not tolerating. In the Hulu documentary, which I've watched all 6 episodes. I think it's terrific. I think Laker fans will like this, and if you are concerned that you either know everything that's going to be in there or that it's just going to be polished propaganda, not the case. You will learn stuff, and there's a lot. It's not an expose, but there's a fair amount of candidness in there and introspection and stuff like that. But Jeannie tells this story of when she was first named, I guess it was governor under Dr. Buss. It was when you would serve as a governor. It was different than how they call the governor now, but you were essentially like a representative for the team. The first time I think she ever went to one of these big meetings, she was in a buffet line, and one of the people there grabbed her butt while she was in this buffet line, which was shocking to her. It was humiliating to her. It was something that she felt embarrassed about and ashamed, like, all the different emotions that women talk about all the time dealing with this stuff that has gone on since the beginning of time. And there are these incredible reactions from Janie Buss and Jim Buss, who had never been told this story before. Like, they didn't actually know about this. And you could see like the look of shock on both of their faces when they were told about this. And, Jim was like, did my dad know about this? And stuff like that Jeannie went through, for all of the criticisms you and I have both had about, certain ways she runs the organization and the people that she chooses to give the most power beneath her. This is stuff that I feel pretty confident just would not happen through just the mere diversity of having a woman in charge.
And I think this is a place where the way the Lakers are run as a very small shop, and very, very insular, very small. There's no one in the basketball department for Rob to abuse except Kurt. I guess you could just scream at Kurt all day, but it's like, it's such. The Lakers are not. The Lakers are still sort of. They're not set up in this sort of corporate, techie bro culture kind of way. And this is probably one of the places where it's helpful. But I agree with you. I think who your leader is matters. And, you should have a leader who, regardless of their gender, wouldn't tolerate this sort of thing or whatever. But I do think there is something about when the boss is a woman.
It doesn't guarantee that things won't happen.
It absolutely does not. But I think
it can help.
It can't. It probably doesn't hurt at the very least.
And Jeannie is, by pretty much universal counts, an inherently nice person.
This is Robert Sarver, before all this, was considered a jerk. You being rich and being a decent human being are not the same. I don't think Mark Cuban is a bad guy. I don't. I think I think at his core, I think he means well, tries to be, but it is not.
He can be a real,
no question,
when he wants to, and I've experienced it personally.
Absolutely. But people are complicated, whatever. But I think it is not at all surprising to me that the Mavericks had that kind of culture, given
his
Mark Cuban's background in business and the world he comes from, which is, that sort of super bro-y tech bro kind of place, that it's not surprising to me that they had those problems in that organization, despite the fact that I don't think that is something that Cuban would set out to do or would be insensitive to, here, I just don't think he was conditioned to even notice or care or and that is to his detriment.
To answer, though, Brian, the question that you originally asked, this is kind of a cold way to frame it, but I think it's actually, at least for some fans of any franchise, not just the Lakers, but any team, how good are you going to be? The level of success in a lot of ways matters in terms of what fans might be willing to compartmentalize. We see this with athletes all the time. They're going to be Cleveland Browns fans who are compartmentalizing the hell out of Deshaun Watson when he eventually takes the field for them, because he is a pretty bad dude, it would appear, that is also a really good quarterback. And Cleveland Browns fans, like every other fan base across all sports, they want to win.
I love the Dodgers. I think the Dodgers are, their front office is as good as any in any sport anywhere. The track record of success is tremendous. They went out and got Trevor Bauer. It was abhorrent when they did it. It was stupid when they did it. I'm glad it bit him in the ass, but they still did it.
I'm not trying to,
and that was an interesting one for fans because, but even that is sort of a different thing. And again, I am not, the lack of competence that they've shown that we've seen from the Lakers front office does not equate in any way to the lack of moral clarity that wasn't shown and the disgusting behavior that was allowed to fester in the Phoenix front office and places like Dallas, certainly in the Clippers organization and all that. It's not the same, but it is one of these things where,
I think generally
fans are always put in that kind of awkward position of I do this because I want my team to win, but I also want to be proud of my team. Ideally, I can be both. But if I have to choose, which one do I choose?
To answer, I think in all honesty, most fans are far more tolerant of bad behavior from the athletes who are more likely to bring them the championships than they would be from the front office. I think most fans, unless you're talking about like a specific attachment that like Laker fans had with Dr. Buss, for the most part, I think fans are far more tolerant or would be willing to look away with the athletes than the ownership, because for the most part, they don't care about the owners other than how much money are they willing to spend or front office.
And owners, the owners who are bad, often bad people in this way often put out a bad product. So, Donald Sterling's product for so many years was awful too. The only difference is it's easy for the team to get around to it and do the right thing. And the Dodgers sent Trevor Bauer away. He'll never pitch for the Dodgers again, even if baseball lets him back in, whatever the rules are. You can't do that with the owner. The owner owns the team, and the owner doesn't want to sell the team until Frank McCourt sold the team. What are you going to do? He owns the team. Yeah. And so it's harder to escape. Players are temporary, owners technically so, but much less so. If that guy or woman doesn't want to give up the team, leagues they have limited recourse in what they can do. And it's a different it's a different version of this compartmentalization conversation, and it's a different thing than it's just a different kind of angst than what Lakers fans are going through right now, where they're very upset with operations, but don't have to be ashamed of him in that way. Whereas Suns fans are thrilled with operations, but ultimately have to be ashamed of their ownership. And so it's just an interesting contrast. So
here's the thing. We'll find out how ashamed they really are, because depending on how ashamed they are, how angry they are, how outraged they are, Robert Sarver either will or will not feel more pressure to have to sell his team.
Yeah, players too, sponsors, all of it.
Yep.
All right, Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you go to get the podcast. We got some Russell Westbrook news that will get people's ears perked up. We'll try to get to for the rest of the week. Some other conversations. about team owners and how these teams running. We're getting close to training camp, so a lot of stuff rolling around. Media Day only a couple weeks away. Thanks to everybody for making us first listen of every day. We'll see you next time.